يا راغبا في كل علم نافع.
ينمو العلم ويتقدم بتقنياته ومجالاته، ومعه نطور أدواتنا في تقديم العلم الشرعي. أكاديمية
زاد أكاديمية ينبوعها صاف ليروي غلة الظمآن. هذه عقيدتنا الصحيحة فطرة تنفي الشكوك بواضح البرهان. بشرى لنا زاد أكاديمية للعلم كالأزهار في البستان.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue inshallah ta'ala with Islamic Creed level 3, and we'll talk about shirk, associating partners with Allah, and the different types of shirk briefly. And this is something that when we take ourselves from one level to the other in matters of knowledge, we need to make sure that we are upon the principles of the deen, and then we expand more and more the more that we gain more knowledge. Shirk is what negates at-tawheed, associating partners with Allah. And many people, they think that a shirk is just one act. If you make sujood to other than Allah, this is shirk, and that's the end of it. Of course, this is a major mistake, because there are many things that comes under the categories of shirk, and we have to understand it very well. And the shaitan, Iblis, his main objective is for people to fall into shirk. And sins are steps that he would take people from one step to the other, because he wants them to die in the state of shirk wal-'iyadhu billah. He wants the people to be in the hellfire forever, like him. So therefore this is a goal of the shaitan, and we have to protect ourselves. And also some of the shirk that is hidden, and some of it is major, some of it is minor. As we mentioned about matters of kufr, there is major kufr. If a person dies in that state, he will be among the people of the hellfire forever. If he repents to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the major sin, from the major shirk, from the major kufr, if a person repents to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the major kufr, and he dies as a believer, he is in the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's about how a person depart from this life. So when it comes to the ahkam, the rulings of this worldly life, either a person is upon major or minor shirk or kufr, also as mentioned before. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ, when he even mentioned a type of shirk that is hidden, he says, "Ya أيها الناس اتقوا هذا الشرك فإنه أخفى من دبيب النمل." You know, O people, shield yourself, protect yourself from this shirk, associating partners with Allah, because it's more hidden than the footsteps of the ants. Whether it's showing off that can be in the heart of a person, or even from a shirk al-khafi, as it's going to be mentioned, hidden shirk. Like Ibn Abbas and others would say, when someone, for example, would say, لَوْلَا الْبَطُّ لَسُرِقَ الدَّارِ. If it wasn't for the ducks in the house would have been stolen. That means he does not rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says that what saved the house from being stolen is the ducks that make loud noise. You know, even though the statement is not necessarily a statement that is, something major, but it shows there's something hidden in there in the heart, that the heart should be only attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we need to fear a shirk, and not to be in state of I'm secure from it, because even Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he said وَجُنُوبِنِي وَبَنِيَّ أَن نَعْبُدَ الْأَصْنَامِ, "O Allah, protect me, prevent me and my offsprings from worshipping idols." That's why Ibrahim al-Nakha'i rahimahullah, he said, وَمَنْ يَأْمَنُ الْبَلَاءَ بَعْدَ Ibrahim. Who can save himself from such a calamity after Ibrahim alayhi salam? So we have to warn ourselves, and we have to warn our offsprings of all kinds and types of shirk, and it's a mandatory knowledge that we need to learn to avoid it. Not to learn it to start pointing fingers at people and calling them names and things like this, but to protect ourselves and to warn and to be away from these major matters of evil, wal-'iyadhu billah. So when we talk about a shirk, which is coming from partnership, having more than one, so giving or making a partner with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His Lordship, in His uluhiyyah, that He is the only one worthy of worship, in His names and attributes, that a person or an entity or whatever becomes a rival with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in some of the divinity that is only to be attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is something that comes under the category of shirk, associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called it the major wrongdoing, the major injustice whatsoever. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator, the sustainer, the owner of all things, and then people would worship other than Allah. Or worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the unforgivable sin if a person dies in that state. إنه من يشرك بالله فقد حرم الله عليه الجنة ومأواه النار وما للظالمين من أنصار. Which means whoever associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah forbade for such a person al-Jannah, and his abode, his place is the hellfire. That if he dies in the state of associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not forgive anyone that associate partners with Allah, and He forgives anything other than that, less than ash-shirku billah. And again, this is for those who die in that state. And many verses that talks about this matter, and the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when he was asked, أَيُّ الذَّنْبِ أَعْظَمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ, what is the major sin to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the biggest sin of all? The Prophet ﷺ, he said, أَن تَجْعَلَ لِلَّهِ نِدًّا وَهُوَ خَلَقَكَ. When you make rivals with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He's the one that created you. Then Abdullah ibn Mas'ud said, إِنَّ ذَلِكَ لَعَظِيمٌ, this is the greatest sin ever. So as a result of learning this, right, we correct our perception of things. What is the worst sin ever committed on the face of earth? What's the biggest crime ever committed on the face of earth? Is associating partners with Allah. So this is something of a serious matter, and that's why, as we talked about al-kufr, there are different types of shirk also. There is major shirk and there is minor shirk. And the benefit of that also is to understand what takes a person outside the fold of al-Islam versus what still a person within the fold of al-Islam but committed a major sin, and it's given the word shirk because it shares the root of the shirk in general, which is the attachment of the heart to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first type, which is the major shirk, that takes the person outside the fold of al-Islam. If a person dies in that state without repenting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he will be in the hellfire forever. And the meaning of it is that when a person makes an act of worship to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, any act of worship, even if it's one act of worship, because al-ibadah is the purpose of our life, and the only one worthy of worship is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the meaning of La ilaha illallah. So any ibadah, if a person does it to other than Allah, then a person committed a major shirk. So for example, someone makes dua to other than Allah. Ad-du'a huwa al-ibadah. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said, the dua is the ibadah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقَالَ رَبُّكُمُ ادْعُونِي أَسْتَجِبْ لَكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, invoke me, make dua to me, I will respond to you. And then after that he said, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ عَنْ عِبَادَتِي سَيَدْخُلُونَ جَهَنَّمَ دَاخِرِينَ. Those who arrogantly turn away from my ibadah, which is the dua. The dua is ibadah. So if someone makes dua to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that means that he committed a major shirk. And because of that, to make sure that we get this meaning correctly, the dua is of two types. There is the dua which is the ibadah, which is to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the different types of ibadat, which is basically what the dua is also means. And the dua of a mas'ala, or asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when people, think sometimes that the dua is only the first type versus the second type, it's okay to ask other than Allah. Of course not. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ مَا لَا يَضُرُّهُمْ وَلَا يَنفَعُهُمْ وَيَقُولُونَ هَؤُلَاءِ شُفَعَاؤُنَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. The disbelievers, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that they worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who do not harm them or benefit them, and they say they are the ones that would intercede for us. مَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفًا. They said we don't worship them except that they will get us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if someone makes dua to a prophet or to an angel or to a righteous person or a grave or whatever, goes to the grave and says, "O Prophet of Allah, forgive my sins. O righteous person, forgive my sin. Make me among the people of Jannah." This is mushrik. This is shirk billah, this is major shirk, of course, and this is a very obvious thing. Seeking help from the dead, going to the graves to ask for their helps and all of these types of things. What's the difference between that and the people of Jahiliyyah when they would go to the images of the righteous ones, idols that in the image of those who are righteous, and they would call them besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In their hearts, they're picturing that individual that died and seeking their help and asking them besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the shirk that was present at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the Prophet ﷺ to remove and to call people to be upon the tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, when a person dies, he does not own for himself anything. And we should work and act upon what the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is upon. So this is in brief some of the matters with the major shirk, but one thing that we need to perfect and the understanding of it, what is permissible and what's not permissible when it comes to asking other than Allah. Since there's the dua of al-mas'ala, when you make dua, you're asking. Is it permissible to ask from the human beings something, or it's not permissible whatsoever? What's the criteria? What's the matter of knowledge that governs this matter? We'll do that inshallah ta'ala next time. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who learn and protected from all forms of kufr and shirk. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
يا راغبا في كل علم نافع
ينمو العلم ويتقدم بتقنياته ومجالاته، ومعه نطور أدواتنا في تقديم العلم الشرعي. أكاديمية زاد،
زاد أكاديمية ينبوعها صاف ليروي غلة الظمآن. هذه عقيدتنا الصحيحة فطرة تنفي الشكوك بواضح البرهان. بشرى لنا زاد أكاديمية للعلم كالأزهار في البستان.